Today I decided to record a video that is all about my first job, which was at GameStop. And you may have heard how bad GameStop is as a job, and you may have not. And that's perfectly fine. No worries. I will fill you in. Trust me, the tea is being spilt. I may not seem like it, but I am a gamer. I have thought about doing Let's Plays because I think it would be really fun, but it's just not something that's feasible at the moment because I don't really play on computers. I play mainly on PlayStation, and that would be a little difficult because I don't have any sort of recording equipment other than the one that's built into the PS4, and that only lasts for 15 minutes at a time, which clearly would not give us a lot of gameplay. I've been gaming since I think I was about 7, and my first game was Morrowind, so I have been into gaming for a long time. I am currently 22, so if that doesn't tell you anything. So I applied at GameStop when I want to say I was 19 at the time, and it was my first job because I lived in a tiny town where there was nothing really available unless you wanted to work at a gas station, and you had to be 18. And as soon as I turned 18, I got married and I moved to Florida so that I could start my schooling. I didn't work when I was a teenager. So GameStop was my first job. I only got about 4 hours a week, and that was normal. Sometimes I got less. Sometimes I didn't get scheduled at all. And sometimes during the holidays, I got 8 hours a week at maximum. Usually my paychecks were about $60 or less. And that really sucked. And I worked there for about a year and a half before I decided I was finally done. One of the first things that probably should have tipped me off that it was not a good job and that I should not stay there was that not only did my coworkers refer to me as eye candy to make people buy the games, but also several times my male customers would either ask me if I actually played games, or they would assume that I didn't play games and just completely write me off and ignore me. They also would often call and then ask for a male coworker to talk to them over the phone, or they would continuously flirt with me while I'm trying to cash them out. There was no need for people to treat me like that while I was there. That was like the first big thing for me to deal with, because this was at the time that I finally started becoming myself in my own style. I started to really get into the goth scene, and that was like my first little baby bat step. And so I definitely looked different, and sometimes my manager would get really mad at me for the way that I dressed or other stuff like that, which I get. I was wearing like band t-shirts that had like holes in it and that sort of thing, but I just thought it was cool and it fit with the aesthetic of GameStop, and I just felt like it made sense, but clearly my manager did not agree. I had all male coworkers. I had 1 or 2 female coworkers over the years, but they were always seasonal and they didn't stay, or they ended up getting fired or ended up leaving because of whatever reason. I didn't know. I guess that probably should have tipped me off that there was something wrong or that there was some sort of sexism going on. And I was proud to be there and be the only female worker because, I thought that should be rare. It wasn't until they started to change the requirements of my work that I decided to leave. So on a couple occasions, a man asked to marry me while I was cashing him out. That was a little weird. I often got referred to as honey or sweetie, or people would ask me about what I was wearing, or they would say my lipstick was hot, or just made comments that were unnecessary. And as a person with social anxiety, I didn't know how to respond. I would just kind of get quiet and laugh because I was afraid to say no to someone because I was not necessarily in a safe place. And even though I had a male coworker with me there all the time, that didn't necessarily mean that he would come to my aid. On a couple occasions they did. my manager, when the guy asked me to marry him, he stepped in and was like, she's already married, like, leave her alone. And when the one guy said that my lipstick was hot, another male coworker asked him to stop talking about it and that it was not an appropriate time. I did feel slightly defended. It wasn't completely unfair, but I do think that with the newer restrictions where I had to talk to every single person that walked through the door, I had to constantly bother people, it was not fair. It was not a good situation. I know that someone doesn't want to talk to me. I'm not going to walk up to them and be like, hey, hello, do you have a membership? I'm going to leave them alone because I know that that would be the best customer service to them. There was on one occasion where my manager forced me to go and talk to somebody. And when I went up to him, I said, hey, did you need any help today? He immediately yelled no at me and then turned around and tried to go back into the corner. And so I turned around and I was already really stressed out at this point because I didn't want to go and talk to him. And I turned around and I looked at my manager and I was like, I don't know what you want from me. I told you this was not a good idea. And he's like, oh, that's just that guy. Like, don't worry about it. And then on several occasions when I'd try to walk up to somebody to say hello, they'd race away from me and weave throughout the store to try and get away from me before I could talk to them. And that happened at least 10 times where I knew someone didn't want to talk to me and I had to chase them through the store anyways. And it just wasn't it was not a good situation, and I didn't know how to approach people because I felt very uncomfortable. And my coworkers would tell me, let's just role play through a scenario or blah, blah, blah. And I guess that's kind of a good way to practice, but it's not conclusive to everybody, and it's not really a fair judgment of what people will actually treat you like. I don't think that it was ever fair, and I don't think that it was something that should have been mandated by anyone, especially someone that was suffering with anxiety. I have generalized anxiety, which means that I basically score in all the different genres of anxiety. At the time, I was not medicated and I was not diagnosed. And so because of that, my manager thought I was overreacting and that I needed to stop being a drama queen and that I just needed to go and talk to people and that I couldn't be shy and that wasn't really allowed. I don't know how you disallow a personality type. If I hadn't been forced to talk to people, I wouldn't have been nervous. But the whole thing was that I was forced to talk to people. I would have been very happy to talk to people who needed help, who actually were asking for help, but it was a totally different thing to force me to talk to people who didn't want to talk to me. I really wish that, and I really hope that they change these rules at GameStop, aside from just the requirements to talk to every single person that walked in the door. I had to make a certain number of sales, a certain percentage, really, of sales per week. And this was an extremely unfair thing to do to most of the workers because most of us were like me, we're a sales associate, and we only got 4 hours a week. And because of that, you had to make every type of sale at least once in your 4 hours, or you were considered under, and they had a reason to fire you, essentially. If you were under the percentage 2 weeks in a row, they were allowed to fire you for that. And they would. They made that very clear. I knew that I wasn't getting any better at talking to the people. I knew that the situation was not being understood, that I was not being understood, and my mental health was not being cared for in that situation, and that's why I left. I made it very clear that that was why I left, that my anxiety was too bad, and I just didn't feel like I could meet their requirements. And I felt like it was kind of unfair, but I'd just rather leave on a good note. After that, my manager still scheduled me for the next 2 weeks, but on the day of my scheduled day, he would have someone call me about an hour before my shift and tell me that my shift was canceled. I don't know if this was because he was mad about the situation or what was going on. I'm not entirely sure, but he was being very petty about it. He clearly had a lot of aggression towards me, and I didn't know how to deal with that because I'd never done anything wrong. I'd never done anything that was necessarily incorrect. I just wasn't doing well with talking to people, and he treated me very, very harshly for that. My anxiety was probably at its worst at the time that I left. It got worse from there until the point that I decided to get diagnosed, and I got medicated for it. I am technically diagnosed with both depression and anxiety, and my medication helps me a lot. My medication makes me feel like a confident person. It makes me not give up on a lot of things, and it makes me not so scared of other people and the outcomes of certain situations. When I had come back from Florida to first start this job, I had just been in an entirely different environment. I was a student and I wasn't working, and I was walking back and forth to school across a 4-lane highway. I was often catcalled at, and I was living in the ghetto. People were getting arrested on their front porch right next to me, and police cars would even catcall at me. And I was often offered to be escorted home by men I didn't know. And it was just a really uncomfortable and kind of hostile situation. There were a lot of people pretending to be homeless to get money from you, and they would tell you the same lie every time they saw you. I don't know, I was still in that mindset of I needed to protect myself. And so I think that was part of the reason that I had such a hard time while I was there. That definitely contributed to me not feeling safe in my work environment. I am very glad to no longer work for them. I wish that things could have ended better. But yeah, so on that note, I decided to create this cyberpunk piece. I felt it was very fitting with the GameStop prompt, I guess you could say. I felt it was very fitting, and I really loved how she turned out. I was a little stressed in the middle of coloring her because I got a little wild with colors and I wasn't sure how to put it back together, but I did end up making it work. Several times my camera just turned off while I was recording and while I was coloring, so I apologize. I did miss several sections of when I was coloring because I didn't know, because my camera didn't make a sound or do anything like it normally does when it turned off. That's why it looks like that, where it like jumps from one part to one part to one part. And also when I first started recording, I didn't realize that the memory card wasn't in there, so it's now directly on the camera, and I can't get it off because I don't have a wire that connects directly to my camera. I only have one that connects to an SD card reader. So I hope you enjoyed the piece. I hope you gathered something from my experiences at GameStop. Anyways, until next time, I'll be drawing.